I would like to also offer my happy Ascension feast day to you. Normally when I give a homily, I put the message out there and I trust that the Holy Spirit will get it into you and so that you understand it. However, tonight I thought maybe I better tell you what the message is in case I don't do a good job of doing that. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little difference between what disciple is, which most of you have heard for your entire life, and what a missionary disciple is, which is something that you've started to hear this year. And so, starting back, a disciple is something that I remember. I was probably 6 or 7 in Catholic school and everything, and they said a disciple is friend and follower of Christ. And so, for all the years, that's what I thought that it was, and in reality, that's what it is. But it's kind of an incomplete definition, in the sense that if you're a friend and follower of Christ, it at least implies that it's something that you can do by yourself. You have that relationship with Jesus. And so, while the rest of us were hibernating over the past year or so, there were people in this parish, the new evangelization team, as well as the Adult Faith Formation Committee, they were working on researching what it was that made differences in Catholic churches that were really flourishing and the congregation was engaged and everything else, versus those Catholic churches that were kind of stale, that were stagnant, and they weren't going anyplace. And so one of the things that they discovered is that those churches where the congregations really understood what missionary discipleship was all about were the ones that were really flourishing. Now, in the way, words and definitions kind of get in our way, and a lot of times when we think of missionary, we think of people who are going overseas or someplace far away to do God's work and everything else. Well, missionary disciple is one that's called to share with others the love of Jesus through their words and action. Now, really, when you think of what I just told you about disciple, friend and follower of Christ, and what I said about missionary disciples, one called to share with others the love of Jesus through their words and actions, right away you don't necessarily see that there's a difference, except that there really is. Because as I said before, when you talk about friend and follower of Jesus, then a lot of Christians limit themselves to this relationship, the vertical relationship. And they don't see the requirement to have a horizontal relationship with others. And that's where missionary discipleship really comes in. Because one called to share with others the love of Jesus, discipleship, but through their words and actions. And so if that sounds a little confusing to you, I have 2 short stories that hopefully will bring the point across. So there was a religious leader who called on 5 of his most ardent supporters and told them to go out and make disciples, just as Jesus told his disciples in our gospel reading today. All 5 left immediately. Time passed, and one by one they returned. The first one came back with 400 new converts. The religious leader asked, "How did you manage to gain so many?" The first supporter said, "I went around among the poor sections of town. I found great poverty, suffering, and want. So I promised them that we would take care of all of their needs." Wouldn't you follow that? The second came back with 300 new converts. The religious leader asked, "And what approach did you use?" The second supporter said, "I told them about heaven and the great reward that is waiting there for those who follow us." The third came back with 200 new converts. The religious leader asked, "And what approach did you use?" The third supporter said, "I pulled no punches. I told them they would go straight to hell unless they followed us." I'm sure some of us have heard that one before. The fourth came back with 100 new converts. The religious leader asked, "And what approach did you use?" The fourth supporter said, "I decided to go around among the simple and the uneducated. I convinced them with my rhetorical skills and persuasive logic." Finally, after a long delay, the fifth returned with only 10 new converts. "What took you so long?" the religious leader asked. The supporter replied, I wasn't able to sow the seed at once. You have to wait for the snow to melt and the ground to soften. So I waited. As I waited, I befriended them, trying to give them an example of what we believe and how we live our lives. While I was living with them, I discovered that freedom was very important to them. To deprive them of this would be to undermine their dignity and devalue their consent. I also learned that they were very generous people and not afraid to sacrifice. So I told them about the costs of discipleship, but I stressed the good that they could do for others and for God as his disciples. They seemed impressed. However, when I asked how many of them would commit to such a life, only 10 agreed to come with me. Of the 5 supporters, the religious leader only commended the last supporter's efforts. The first 4 appealed to the weakness and fear of their followers. When you do that, it's easy to play on people's fear, and then they can be manipulated. But this interferes with their freedom and negatively influences their consent. The 5th supporter appealed to their strengths. He took the time to befriend them and tried to win them over by his example. That is a positive example of being a missionary disciple. It is a slower and a more difficult method, but in the end, those who are converted will have deeper roots and greater commitment. The second example, Christopher was a practicing Christian. He never missed church on Sunday. He and his family lived in a comfortable house in the fashionable part of town. They had good health, a secure lifestyle, a well-paying job. He and his wife were happy and satisfied. However, something that bothered him was that his next-door neighbor was a professed atheist, a man that never darkened the door of a church. As a Christian, Christopher felt it was his responsibility to try to convert him. But the question was how. On a number of occasions, in talking with him, he had brought up the subject of religion, doing it as delicately as he could. But in the end, it got him nowhere. Then one day he got inspired. If he could get his neighbor to read the Gospels, that would convert him. His thinking was, who could fail to be moved by the Gospels? The only problem was how to get a copy of the Gospels to him. He knew he couldn't just knock on the man's door and hand him a copy. That would only put him off. He would have to be more subtle. He finally decided to mail a paperback copy of the Gospels to him anonymously. After doing this, he waited. Days went by and nothing happened. There wasn't the slightest indication from next door that the man had seen the light. About 2 weeks later, Christopher's wife had occasion to visit the neighbor. When she came back, she said to her husband, "You know the copy of the Gospels you sent him? It's in the recycle bin." Christopher was indignant. It wasn't right to throw a religious book into the recycling bin. He went next door, picking up the copy of the Gospels as he passed the recycle bin. He confronted his neighbor, saying, "I'm sorry for intruding, but I found this in your recycle bin. You know, if only you'd read it, you might find God." "But I do read it," came the neighbor's surprising reply. "I read it every day." But Christopher said, "I don't understand." The neighbor said, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" Christopher responded, "Yes, of course." "Well, I've been reading your life every day for the past 10 years. And with that, the neighbor closed his door. Christopher was a negative example of being a missionary disciple. What about you? If it was a crime to be a Christian and you were put on trial, would there be enough evidence to find you guilty?